technical issues, and just thought it was important to take a meeting that was cross-party, which is important to stress, but was internal workings, and thought really if we're going to update the constitution and make it more accessible, that bringing it out as a public meeting would be really helpful and hopefully have engagement from people either joining or watching online. But I think for us, it's just the importance of transparency to have that here. I'd like to welcome Councillor Vinnie Ludgate to his first meeting. Welcome and good to see you. And also really good to have you, as I said, to ensure that we continue to work cross-party. We have members of Youth Parliament. It's great to see you again, Susanaz, not just because I saw you at the weekend at a conference, but always good to see you. And Mia, lovely to see you again and welcome. We have a member of the public, Alexandra, as well. Welcome. And I hope you find the meeting beneficial. And can I ask you to introduce yourself for the purpose of the meeting? Thank you.
Hello, my name's Rabia Hutton. I'm the Governance Officer.
Okay, thank you so much. And I said Dawn Carter will introduce herself when she comes back in. Can I ask officers, so if I call you, if you just introduce yourself, Peter?
Yes, hello, Peter Gray, Governance Officer.
Mario, thank you.
Mario from ICT Support.
Louise?
I'm Louise Humphreys. I'm the Head of Legal and Governance.
Thank you. Councillor Troughton?
Hello, Lynn Troughton, Labour member of the committee.
Tessa? Thank you.
Hello, I'm Tessa Mitchell. I'm the governance team leader.
Natalie?
Hello, I'm Natalie Kakai and I'm on secondment in the governance team.
Is it Nikenko? Please correct me if I'm not saying your name wrong.
I was close. Nikencha, training solicitor in the legal services.
Lovely to see you again. I hope you're settling in, which might not seem as new now to your role, but I know that you're a valid asset to the team. So it's our pleasure to have you.
Thank you.
Okay. Ms. Bell?
Yeah, hi, I'm Lucinda Bell. I'm the Education Solicitor for Hackney.
Thank you. Councillor Williams?
Hi, my name is Carol Williams. I'm the Cabinet Lead Member for Employment Skills and Equalities.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I've got, well, I was just about to give your apologies for lateness, Councillor Gordon, and you've just appeared. So I'll give you time to take your seat, but welcome, Councillor Gordon, to the meeting. So do members have any declarations of interest that they would like to declare? I can't see any indications online.
Chair, you missed me off the list. You didn't call me. Councillor Ian Rathbone, Leabridge.
Apologies, Councillor Rathbone, of course, in the room with me, and that was a terrible oversight, but thank you. I'm sure I would have remembered because you undoubtedly, I'm sure, will be contributing. So thank you for that. That's really helpful. So can we now move on to, actually, were there any declaration of interest? I didn't see anyone indicate. So minutes of the previous meeting, can I ask members to agree the minutes of the Constitution meeting on the 13th of July 2022 as accurate and recording of the proceedings?
Agreed.
Agreed. Thank you. Can we now move on to item 4 on the agenda? So I want to just talk to the committee about a meeting that I had with my vice chair, or the vice chair rather, because Councillor Gordon does not belong to me. She's not a possession. She's a valuable asset to us, but not my possession, of course. Councillor Gordon and I met with officers in relation to the meeting, and we thought that actually to make the meeting more engaging and also more productive in terms of what would happen in terms of people contributing to the meeting, that would move away from a page turn, which we did in the previous meetings, to a more formal open dialogue around suggestions or things that have noticed. So things like, for example, we're a commission may have changed its name. That's not necessarily something that we need to identify in a page turn. We think that we can agree that as a committee that we want those substantive changes to go ahead, but rather using this time to more a dialogue where we think actually a part of the constitution isn't maybe as clear as it should be. So officers will present an update on the progress with regards to the work on the constitution more generally. Officers then will take us through each part, and there'll be opportunities for us to give brief and oversight contributions, and I'll give a few comments at the beginning of each section to prompt and shape that, and obviously bring in our members of Youth Parliament at any point if you so wish to do that. And then providing a short summary of the purpose of the parts in sections and the constitution. And then the committee will then discuss those points after we've had the PowerPoint presentation and be able to summarise that. Suzanne and Mia, although I've introduced you, would you like to introduce yourselves before I carry on with the meeting?
Hi everyone, my name is Sudan Astop. I am the Member of Youth Parliament for Hackney and I lead the Education and Youth Participation Forum. I'm also the Young Speaker of Hackney.
Oh, thanks. Hello, my name is Mia Arthur and I am a member of Leander and Diane's Life After COVID Forum.
And Dawn, now you're back in the room. Thank you for your assistance. If you'd like to introduce yourself.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Dawn Carter-McDonald, Director of Legal, Democratic and Electoral Services and the Monitoring Officer. Thank you.
So as I said, the nature of this meeting after the dialogue between Councillor Gordon, myself and Louise and Dawn, the nature of the meeting has changed from the page turn to having suggestions, and to demonstrate that members read their papers, which we of course do. Councillor Gordon, Charlton and Councillor Binny Luddock have also submitted suggestions to officers ahead of the meeting in the nature of the new way we're going to work, and they will be considered, and officers will take that to their officer working group. This is a Constitution Officer Working Group for that to be resolved. Anything that's straightforward will just be resolved. Anything that may need a bit more clarity will either come back to the next meeting or via email outside of this meeting, and we can discuss later if we need a smaller working group outside of the conventions of the meetings that are already in the diary. Through this meeting, officers will be making amendments in terms of the suggestions that are made in the meeting, and again, anything that's easily resolved will be resolved in the meeting. Anything that needs more clarity and dialogue will be taken away to that members reference group. So on that note, can I hand over to you, Louise, for the presentation? And hopefully that will also come up on screen as well. Over to you, Louise. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Bramble. I'm just going to be sharing my screen now, so hopefully this will appear for people. We'll just put it onto a slideshow. Hopefully that is now visible for everyone, either who are joining us online or indeed in the room.
Yes, we can see that on the screen. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Bramble. The first thing for members this evening is to provide you with a brief update on progress. So the Constitution Officer Working Group, COWG, we continue to meet on a fortnightly basis, going through the various elements of the Constitution, the various parts and sections. And you will see in paragraph 3.2 of the report this evening, there's details of the progress with regard to reviewing those elements and where things sit. And obviously you have before you this evening various parts and sections for your consideration. We have also held some initial discussions with the Council's web team regarding our options for publication when we get to the point of having a finally approved constitution, and how we can best use the Council's website to ensure accessibility. We've also held an initial discussion with our council's consultation team around how we can do some work engagement with the public. And I'll come on when I deal with the timeline as to when we might programme that in. But the intention is that at one of the future meetings of the committee, we'll present an engagement project, if you like, engagement plan, so that members can see what we're proposing to do and obviously comment upon it before we get that element underway. Our colleagues in overview and scrutiny, they are looking at the various elements of the Constitution that deal with scrutiny, and indeed the scrutiny panel will be looking at those elements at their next meeting, which is on the 20th of February. And then just by way of, apologies, that's now gone. Okay, that's better. And then just by way of update in terms of various codes and protocols, obviously there are some documents within the Constitution that are outside the remit of this committee in terms of recommending approvals or even approving them. Code of conduct that rests with the Standards Committee, the Planning Code of Conduct that rests with the Corporate Committee, and the Licensing Code of Conduct that rests with the Licensing Committee. However, those reviews of the Planning and Licensing Code are underway, and they will be going through their various approval processes in due course. And there will be a report to the next meeting of the Standards Committee to look at particularly the mandatory training element of the Code of Conduct. So there are some streams of work which run parallel to the work that this committee is looking at in terms of the Constitution as well. And then in terms of timeline, members will recall that the original plan was to have the Constitution ready for adoption at the annual meeting in May. Given where we are with the various review work that's being undertaken, and in order to enable colleagues, including colleagues on the scrutiny side, to have their I've lost the word now, to have their input, that's the word, into this process. What's now being envisaged is that officers will have a, if you like, final draft of the Constitution ready for May, but then we would like to do some public engagement around that final draft to ensure that we have actually met our targets in relation to, is this a document that members of the public can easily access, with particular reference to those parts of the Constitution where they have options for engagement around questions and deputations and petitions, but also, around understanding of who's responsible for which of the council's functions. So the plan will be to do that after we have, insofar as this committee is concerned, what we think is a final draft, but before it goes to full council, to enable us then to reflect upon any comments that we receive and address any queries or concerns around, could we actually, this particular part, although we as an officer group and you as members may think it's clear, we may get some feedback that this could do with further improvement because it's not necessarily clear from a public facing perspective, particularly as we use these documents more frequently. So that will push a timeline then to approval at July full council, if members are so minded to follow that approach. Obviously it's a matter for this committee to decide what timeline they think is most appropriate. So that is a very quick canter through where we are in terms of progress. Obviously happy to take any questions on that specific element before we move on to the various parts of the Constitution.
Thank you. Did anyone have any questions on that particular part? Councillor Rathbone.
Yeah, just to check on. Sorry, it's coming out when you need to. Yeah, I think it's all right now. Yeah, sorry, Chair. Just a bit of an echo. Yeah, just to check that, so it will go to July Council. So there will be plenty of time for consultation in other places.
That's right. I was going to wait till the end of the presentation. So there's been a revision in the timeline, and that's something that Councillor Gordon and I picked up with Dawn and Louise in our meeting, that actually, because there is quite substantive work to still do, and how detailed the documents is and how much we have to work through, we thought it prudent to maybe go to July for the end date rather than the May, which is the AGM, and also because that meeting is always quite such a short meeting anyway, that it's better to go to July and actually also give room for debate and dialogue around the work that we're doing, and also gives us an opportunity to then mock up templates of what it might look out, do some soft testing around asking people to access the website and give feedback, and we can do that with young people, and youth parliament will be key in that, and hopefully they might want to come in a little while to talk about engagement around this and how we make it more accessible. Did you want to? Would you like to come in a bit later, or would you like to come in now? A little later. I thought so. So yeah. So if you just want to maybe have some thoughts and reflections on how we might engage and what we might want to do. Louise, can I hand back over to you, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Bramble. If members are happy with that update, again, these are just quick points to note for members as we're going through this part of the process. We have completed plain English reviews of some parts, but not all of the first draft parts have yet been had their plain English review completed. So that remains a work in progress, and in fact will remain a work in progress for all parts of the Constitution until we hit that final document, because as we change things and may wish to amend things, they will always need to have that iterative process of going back around to make sure that the document remains in plain English. Same is also true of spellings. Always appreciate anybody spotting any spelling mistakes, but clearly it's probably not the best use of this committee's time to be doing that at their various meetings. So we're happy to take any spotted spellings outside of this meeting. The substantive amendments to existing parts of the Constitution, they have been highlighted for you in your committee report. However, there are other amendments that don't go to the substance of things like the existing rules, which we have not highlighted. So, for example, if you were to compare the existing Constitution, you will note that we're moving away from having numbered subparagraphs of subparagraphs and more use of bullet point lists. Again, a reminder, we will be adding all of the appropriate cross-referencing at a later stage when we know finally where all of the parts and sections are sitting. And again, the checks for consistency across the various parts and sections around languages, and where we pick up a change in one part to make sure if we have that's referred to somewhere else, that is also picked up. That will also be an ongoing process. And then finally, although it's not on here, just to remind members that we will have a glossary at the start of the Constitution, which will obviously define various terms where they are used in a particular local government context, because we appreciate that obviously local government can have a language of its own in how people are and things are referred to. So that's the purpose of that glossary. I see a hand from Councillor Troughton, Deputy Mayor Bramble, before I continue.
Thank you, Louise. I'll take Councillor Rathbone in the room and then Councillor Troughton online. Thank you.
Sorry, Chair. I just checking on Louise's points to note. She's still got them up about plain English, because there is some question marks over what kind of plain English there should be. So I just wondered how we were in fact, as it were, going to run the plain English measure over all that we've done.
Thank you, Councillor Rathbone. Can I take Councillor Troughton first and then back to you, Louise?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just wondered what the rationale was for getting rid of numbering and having bullet points, because if you want to refer to something, you have to then count the bullet points. If you want to identify a particular bullet point, you end up having to count them, so that sort of goes away from accessibility.
Back to you. Thank you, Councillor Troughton. Louise, back to you.
Thank you. I'll deal with those points in order. Councillor Rathbone, in terms of plain English, we are following the principles of plain English that are used by the Plain English campaign, particularly around people who are wish to secure things like the crystal mark for plain English. So we are using their principles when we are reviewing the wording contained within our constitution. And then in terms of the second point around bullet points as opposed to numbered paragraphs or numbered subparagraphs, again, it is actually one of the recommendations of plain English is to use bullet point lists where there is a list of things. But as always with these things, we are happy to take comments and views from the committee. If they would prefer things to be numbered as opposed to bullet points, then that's obviously something that the group, the officer group, can reflect on further.
Thank you,
May I
Louise.
just come back, Chair? Sorry.
Yes, of course, Councillor Troughton.
Thank you. Just to say that, I think in general terms, if you're writing a letter or a short report or something like that, but this isn't like that. This is quite a substantial document. And I'm just saying that, the point that I'm making is that if someone wants to refer to something, and you've got bullet points that go over a page end, you end up having to look back onto the next page, and it can just make it really hard to find the thing that you're looking for. So I'll just leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Troughton. Louise, back to you.
Thank you. Happy to take that away, Councillor Troughton, and obviously we can reflect on that further as part of the officer working group as well. Then if we move through the various parts and sections that we have, members will also have had with their agenda papers. I think it's the first appendix. There's just the working index that just provides you that context of where these various parts sit within the whole. As we appreciate that we are moving certain parts around. We've renamed certain parts from previous elements as well. So that's why you have the draft index with your papers, to hopefully help you do some navigation. So part one then, your council. Members will recall that we considered this part at the last meeting of council.
Louise, can I just pause? Councillor Gordon.
Sorry, Louise, I just wanted to really say something about the scrutiny panel, because I think it's probably better say it here as it goes to your introduction rather than later. Just to say that we've had the opportunity, because the Mayor's not able to attend scrutiny panel for his scheduled question time, to have a slightly longer discussion. And obviously the scrutiny sections of the Constitution are slightly different from the rest of it, because they don't require the the sign off of the Mayor like the other sections. So, I think we probably all agree that it's appropriate there should be a sort of separate discussion at scrutiny panel on these issues, and it could be slightly more wide ranging. The date is the 20th of February. I'm aware, obviously, that there aren't any opposition members on scrutiny panels. So, obviously, Councillor Vinnie Levick, you're very, very welcome to attend and write to me in advance. And the same obviously goes for Councillor Steinberger, who I don't think is here at the moment or online, to attend that section of the meeting and obviously participate as appropriate. So I just thought it'd be better to clarify that now rather than later. Thank you. Apologies, Chair.
That's really no need to apologise, Councillor Gordon. That's quite helpful to do that now. Louise, in terms of you're doing a very good job, by the way, doing this online. Just for ease, would you prefer to work through the whole presentation and then we go back to each of the parts for contributions, or would you like to take it contributions as we go along. I just think in terms of ease, while you're online, do you have a preference?
Thank you for that consideration, Deputy Mayor Bramble. I should also say I don't particularly have a preference. I'm just slightly conscious that if I go through the whole presentation and then we start commenting, that's absolutely fine as long as we then deal with the comments in respect of the various parts. I think for the purposes of those who are taking a note, both for the minutes and also for future work for the Constitution Officer Group, it becomes more complicated if we're sort of dotting around from various parts to various parts. But I'm more than happy to run through the parts now, and then we go back to start with part one, if that's your preference.
No, I'm happy. If you're happy, then I think if you give an overlay and then we just get contributions as we go through, that might be, I think that might be straightforward,
Okay,
straightforward.
thank you. So then part one, your council. This is effectively with this part, as members will recall, when we looked at the part at the last meeting, we have renamed this from just an introduction. But its purpose remains the same as in the existing contribution. So it provides an overview of the council and the rights and responsibilities of citizens. We've also added in a new part to that section to provide an overview as to how the council goes about making its decisions and the various parts of decision making that we go through. So consultation with residents and with others where that's appropriate for certain types of decisions around climate change, around sustainability. So all of those various elements that you are all very cognizant of seeing in your committee reports as headings within the committee reports, but just to draw that out particularly for members of the public, so that there's a simple section for them to refer to. As I said, members had this before them at their last meeting as a first draft and provided comments and observations, and then officers went away and looked at it. There is one remaining point for discussion, particularly this evening, which is around, it comes under section C, the rights and responsibilities of citizens, and the definition of a citizen. And then there's just one other further amendment that we will need to make to flag for your attention, which is that the Armed Forces Act 2021 has now, the long-winded answer is has amended an earlier Armed Forces Act, and it now introduces statutory obligations on decision makers and public authorities for certain types of decisions, particularly those decisions relating to certain of our housing functions, education functions, and healthcare functions, to have regard to a number of obligations and equality issues that specifically relate either to members of our current armed forces or people who have been members of our armed forces, and that came into effect in November. We will need to make one further adjustment to it will be section B around decision making to ensure that we have an appropriate reference to that statutory obligation on us when we're making decisions, or certainly relevant decisions. Deputy Mayor Bramble, did you want to raise the issue of citizen, or would you like me to do that for you?
So, yes, I'll thank you. I'll speak to that now. So the officer working group did some desktop activities looking at other local authorities in terms of what they do. One authority, so that's Buckinghamshire, uses the term residents rather than citizen. But then that doesn't apply to people that work within your local authority. If you say that, other local authorities like Newham, Worthing Forest, Southampton, for example, just refer to the different types of citizens in different contexts. So when you are voting, you may, when you pay your rent, you may. It doesn't refer to citizen at all. It just talks about the function and describes you in the function. So we might want to think about that. I like the word resident because it's more accessible. I think more people talk about residents than citizens, but do we then want to limit it? Because it won't then refer to people that live within the borough. So open to colleagues to comment on query on part 1. Councillor Rathbone, Councillor Binny Lubbock, and then Councillor Gordon, in that order. If you just come in after each other, thank you.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, just on who is a citizen, problem with probably using the word resident is that in terms of voters in the borough, there are people who vote as business people, so they're not necessarily residents. Sorry, that's just off the top of my head. I just thought of that. So I don't know whether we ought to really stick to the word citizen. I would prefer resident myself, but I think citizen kind of just covers all those kind of other elements. There's probably some that we haven't kind of quite realised who've got a position in the borough somehow, particularly as voters. Defining a citizen, I've been through this a few times trying to define a citizen. It is a very difficult thing to do, and I'm not sure. I think you were hinting that maybe we don't actually go down that road, because it's defined in section C. It's more important that a citizen is defined by their responsibilities. You know, 1.3, being a citizen also carries with it a number of responsibilities. And I think that's more important rather than trying to define the nature of the word, as it were, or the person, is actually, it's more to do with their responsibilities and functions.
Yeah, just to add to that, I was wondering whether or not it'd be sensible to include both in that, at least at that headline, say residents and other citizens, and then sort of clarify it within each of those particular sections. Is this a good moment to talk about other things in part 1? Yeah. So just to flag up, it's really good to see that environmental benefit as one of the responsibilities of the members. And then I just was wondering whether it should also be included within decision making under 1.14. It doesn't seem like it's quite as specific to say that decisions should, where possible, look to protect and enhance the environment. It just says to consider the impact, so it's not quite as pointed as it is for members. Inequalities, I wonder if we can include care leavers as a thing, as a group that we would like to consider as I know they're not covered by the Equalities Act, but maybe that's something that we could work in this. In 1.16, in the consultations for decision makers, I'm wondering if we can also include something about making sure that the decision makers are trying to identify other appropriate avenues for community engagement and resident participation in decision making, because obviously consultations are, you know, where they're statutory or where they've been chosen to go ahead. We should also be looking for other methods to do that. And then finally, yeah, I was a bit confused by, you know, people who visit the London Borough of Hackney. Some of these points below wouldn't necessarily apply to visitors. And I'm wondering if this is also a good place to include reference to part 6 about how people can participate in the council. And yeah, that's not listed here. If it feels a little bit buried in part 6, if it's not also here up front. Those are my comments. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Just really wanted to sort of maybe add to this discussion that we've obviously highlighted sustainability and climate change and equalities. We do have other cross-cutting policies, and in sort of reviewing the duties of the monitoring officer and section 116 officer, I think there's reference to them having regard to our policies. I wonder whether there is any room for some of our policies. I mean, I'm thinking probably particularly about the poverty strategy to have some status within the Constitution, because we do have these cross-cutting policies. And I don't know whether, you know, just to really sort of embed them at a sort of, you know, a similar level. I don't know whether there's any sort of possibility of that. I mean, we've got 2 or 3 sort of cross-cutting policies, which I think are quite significant.
Yeah, I think we can look at how we best implement that. I just thinking about how we constantly update policies on the website, given that, you know, how you review strategy. So, but I think we can take that away to the officers working group and think about the best way that the public get to know what we're doing. That it's not even that it's cumbersome for officers to do that. We can update it in real time in a way that is meaningful. Dawn, did you want to come in?
Yes, thank you, Deputy Mayor Bramble. I think you pretty much said what I wanted to say, because I think with regards to policies, it's not set in stone, and I think because we have a number of policies which may change over years, and could be driven by different external factors, internal factors, it might be difficult to be so specific. So maybe we can look at a wording which would allow that consideration to be given, but not be specific on, say, for example, a poverty strategy or a specific named strategy. Yeah.
I mean, that makes sense, but I mean, I think, you know, but I think we've got 2 or 3 policies, I think, which do have a particular sort of significance and are, you know, are cross-cutting. I think we could obviously sort of refer to the latest published version, or, you know, something like that. I do appreciate it's sort of ambulatory reference, but just it's, you know, or the current existing version, so.
Yeah, I think the officer working group can go away to think about what are those core policies that sit across all of the organisation that are key to all residents to know, and those that are sort of business as usual, that is only maybe relevant to a particular directorate. It wouldn't be the constitution in the way that we're doing it isn't the right place to do it, because this is about law and statute and ways of working until it isn't, and we amend it. And you wouldn't want a situation where we're having to keep amending the constitution due to lots of policy becoming out of date. So it's only those core ones, but we can look at that in further detail. Thank you. Any more I can't see any more indications on part 1. Just remember, if anything does come to mind, and those of you that are avid readers of deep policy documents, that go back and reread the 158-page document that was circulated to you, you always can come back to us on email or telephone conversation. So don't feel this is the only moment in time that we capture your very thoughtful and useful comments on this. So if I can't see any more indications, can we move on to part 2 for you to introduce, Louise?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Bramble. Again, this was a part of the Constitution that the last meeting of the committee had before it. It deals with our articles of the Constitution. So those are our overarching rules that govern the operation of the council and its structure. And they are similar to companies who have articles of association. They serve the same broad purposes. So again, this is as I say, a document that members have had before them, and officers went away and considered the comments that were made before. The one remaining point that officers would like some further discussion from members and some further guidance is around how we refer to the various political groups, and members will find that in particular at paragraphs or articles 3.4 and 3.5 of those articles of the Constitution, and it's particularly with reference to how we refer to the opposition groups. Members will recall that we had a conversation about that at our last meeting, and one of the tasks that we were given was to go away and look at earlier versions of the Constitution where we had more than one opposition group in previous years, to see how we referred to that. Again, we have done that, and it's a question then of how we go around it. And if I can certainly provide members with the detail of how, for example, in 2011 we referred to opposition groups, and it's just which is more helpful, whether or not we just simply now, instead of trying to sort of be principals and incumbents and minorities, and we just simply go the opposition groups, and it's around that type of thing that I think certainly as officers we would welcome your further views.
Thank you, Louise. That's helpful. And just for context, that due to the cyber attack, officers weren't able to go back and retrieve information past or prior to 2010, 2011, unfortunately. So, you know, even as we try to ensure the work that we're doing is more transparent, more accessible to our communities, the challenges of the awful, inconsiderate cyber attack still continues to be a challenge to the organisation. But thank officers for the work that they've done. Would it be wrong for me to assume that you would like to come in, Councillor Binilaga, being
Yes.
an opposition member?
Yes. Yeah, I guess the one thing that kind of stands out from this is around having the principal opposition group, and if in the event of having two parties of equal number, having the incumbent remain as the official opposition group. I'm just wondering how that sort of squares with natural justice and all that kind of thing, if one group represents a larger number of voters across the borough. And I'm wondering if other councils have approached this with a different, maybe more nuanced approach.
I'll ask Louise to come in over it. I think the approach of opposition groups makes it clear. I think what would be helpful to have in the constitution is a way to distinguish if the opposition groups are different sizes and the number of the opposition groups, simply because depending on the opposition group may be dependent on what you are offered or have access to. A simple thing is that if you have a bigger opposition group, you have more seats to fill on a scrutiny commission, for example. So I think it's really important that we are able to distinguish between opposition groups. In terms of opposition groups and representative voters, I'm going to hand that to Louise. I've got my opinion and thoughts, but I think that someone that's a qualified legal member of staff may be better placed to do that than giving me my what I think is right opinion. Louise, can I? Let's take Councillor Rathbone first before I bring in Louise, and then Councillor Trounston. It's 4 contributions, Louise, but you're a victim of your own success. I know you'll hold it all very well.
Indeed, you are, Louise. Just to say that, I've not been subject to a cyber attack myself personally, so my memory is still here. And in my memory of Hackney Council goes back around 40 odd years, and we've always determined majority and minority groups by the number of seats taken. And that's always been the case. I know what Councillor Binny Lubbock is referring to, but we don't have that system currently. We are first past the post in this borough still. So I think that's the best way of, in fact, deciding it. And I actually think the paragraph 3.5 works quite well and reflects, I think, what we have done certainly in the past.
Thank you. That was broadly along my thinking in terms of changing the constitution that reflects differently to the voting system. You wanted to come in and clarify something?
Yeah,
Councillor?
just to clarify. My point isn't that that overall the principal opposition group shouldn't be determined by the number of members. It was just that in the case of having equal numbers of members, having to determine the principal opposition group by whoever was the previous incumbent is a bit problematic. In the case, it might be the case within a midterm if there is members moving around, or changing their allegiances within the party, that it would make sense to do that. But if there was an election, by-election, or a full election, then it wouldn't really. There's no consistent logic to say that that's they should remain as the principal opposition group. So I'm not against the. I understand we work under a first past the post system, but I'm wondering if we can make it better reflect the residents of Hackney's wishes.
Noted, Councillor. Can I bring in Councillor Troughton before I go back to Louise?
It's okay, Chair. Thank you.
You've Louise, if you want to come in, and then I may come back in on the back of what you say or don't say.
Okay. Thank you, Deputy Mayor Bramble. Just for members' information, back in 2011, the constitution used fairly similar wording more simplistic wording. Article 3 at that point simply stated that the opposition groups will be the party or parties with a minority of members, and you then had to turn to the glossary to where, and it was the glossary that explained even back in 2011 that same point about incumbent opposition groups. It was actually referred to in terms of where opposition groups have an equal number of members, rather than principal, they were called the official opposition. There wasn't actually any reference within that constitution as to how the other opposition group was to be addressed, but one assumes if we're using the word official opposition, does that make them the unofficial opposition? I'm not quite clear myself from back in 2011. As I said, there was no name ascribed to the other opposition groups, who may or may not form the sort of the totality of the opposition back then. It was simply that if there were two opposition groups and they both had an equal number of members, then it would be the official opposition would be the incumbent opposition group. So that part of the constitution, as you'll see from part 2, there's no proposed change. I think it is one of those difficult areas, because you have to make a decision somehow as to who, if as we do, so to take an example, when we have the mayor giving their statement, who goes first after the mayor has spoken. You have to have some rule about how do you determine who that is going to be. If you don't have a rule about that, so by defining somebody as whether you say principal or opposition group 1 and 2 or official and something else, how then do you decide who goes first? Now, you could take the approach, well, we should do it on a rotation, and that would be open to members to decide. But this is the way that most local authorities, where you have an election and then the opposition groups may change, as indeed majority groups may change, and you're just left with the scenario of you've got equal numbers. How do you decide who goes first? It's not the same as about allocation of seats, because that is determined by members and the proportion that they take up within the totality of the membership of council. And that's easily defined. You can have equal numbers there, and it's relatively straightforward. It is predominantly around those scenarios where we can not refer to people as a principal and a minority, or you can just call them opposition groups. But there are certain rules that the council operates for council meetings and cabinet meetings as to effectively who goes first. And it's to try and, as I see it, that's predominantly about trying to help those processes through. So, as I say, this is something that's been in our constitution for a long time. That's not to say that it shouldn't be changed. But this certainly isn't anything new for our constitution, nor is it new for most other authority constitutions.
Thank you. So I suggest this is one that goes back to the officer group and then comes back to us maybe via email, so that there's the better clarity. I don't think it's one that will be resolved in the meeting and just needs a bit more thoughtful consideration. But thank you to what you've done on this so far. Councillor Gordon?
Sharon, I mean, I have to say, I think I do have sympathy with Councillor Binlevit's question. I think, I mean, it's, I think it would be good. I mean, obviously, as Louise has outlined, there are, a number of different options here in the relatively unlikely situation we are in this situation, in the odds. But I think it would be good really to just maybe have some background information. And I think Louise already alluded to this about how other councils deal with this situation and, the different options. I mean, there's probably, Louise has mentioned a rotation option, which I think maybe possibly should be explored. I mean, I can see some issues with it, but I mean, maybe that should be explored. it's even a toss of the coin, which I'm not advocating, but does have a role in democracy. So I think maybe we should have some, maybe different options before us.
I'm totally agreement, and
Yeah.
that's right in line with my suggestion, Councillor Gordon, that officers take it back to the working group and then options are presented to us via email so that we are more confident that the Constitution truly reflects what we want it to. But more also, we want to avoid a point that if there was an equal number of opposition in our midst, that we would then have to now come back and revisit the Constitution. So it's just that forward thinking if things were to change. So as I said, we'll take it back. We'll ask officers take that back to the working group and come back to us via email. Any more comments on part 2? I cannot see any indications online. Councillor Gordon, Councillor Binny Lubbock.
I don't know whether I had more of a technical question. I don't know whether Councillor Binny Lubbock wanted to make another comment on this discussion.
Can I just ask you to make your comment, Councillor Gordon?
Yeah, I just wonder whether we need to explore just a little bit more. I think Councillor Troughton may have said this as well about how the words council and full council are used in this document, and whether they're sort of used consistently, and also whether there's because it's it sets out that the council is the elected mayor and members. I think there's a bit of inconsistency as well as between the use of members and councillors throughout the documents. But also I think there is a a difference. I think maybe we just need to look a bit more closely about the difference between full council as the sort of democratic, responsible body, but also the council as a sort of corporate legal person. I'm not totally, you may have thought it through more than I have, but I'm not totally sure we're quite there yet really about making that. That's not anything for discussion now. Maybe that's something that if officers agree with it, they could take away.
I wouldn't say it's an oversight. I think it's something that we'll address as officers are working through the documents, because I remember when we first began this journey, we made a decision to reference members as councillors and not members, because people may not understand what members is. I think there's an opportunity for us to, although it's not related to the Constitution, to think about our language when we talk an organisation, because of course we still are referred to as members within the council, and maybe it might be easier for us to ensure that we're called councillors within documents, but also across the organisation, and hopefully that will bring better clarity across the piece. But yeah, you're right. It was something that we decided before in the first round in our internal cross-party working group. So I just think to keep that consistency is helpful. Councillor Binny Lubbock.
Just a quick one on ward forums, which might have been discussed last time, but I might have missed. 10.5, it says here, councillors can opt to hold joint ward forum meetings on a regular case-by-case basis. I'm just wondering if that should be clarified. I assume that means joint ward forums between different wards. Just not sure that's made entirely clear there. And then at 10.8, it says each meeting is advertised in advance. Just wondering if there can be a little bit more detail about what that would consist of. Just having had a ward forum where some of the advertising and making residents aware has been sort of a point of contention. I'm wondering if that could be codified a little bit more.
So I'm sure I'll bring Louise back in and try to chair more than I dominate the meeting. So Louise, I'll let you come in.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Bramble. So just quickly, in terms of the points from Councillor Troughton and full council, officers have been trying to reflect as we go through this about how we refer to elected members, councillors, full council, the council. Obviously, London Borough of Hackney as a local authority is a legal entity. So that is the council. That is it as a legal entity. We have meetings of which and it tends to be the meetings that we describe as being full council rather than just council, because we also have council meetings, if you like, little c and little m, and it's trying to make it sort of a distinction between meetings that are and committees, etc., that are meetings of the council in the broader sense because they involve council functions, as opposed to meetings of the entire set of elected members. And in terms of councillors and elected members, what we have been reflecting on, following on from previous decisions around how we refer to and previous iterations of constitution where members was changed for councillors, is that technically councillor is the wrong form of address for our mayor. He isn't a councillor, he's an elected member, but he is the mayor. So we have tried to reflect and use elected members where we are talking about the mayor and councillors where we're just referring to councillors with that title, if you like. Now, I'm not saying we've got that right. I'm happy to go away and think about that some more, but that was the rationale for our approach, where in a constitution we sometimes refer to elected members and sometimes refer to councillors, because the two, if you, as we've discovered, and if we just refer to councillors and actually the elected mayor can do some of these things, then by definition we wouldn't want to be seen to be excluding him. So that was about that. But as I say, happy to go away as a group and think some more about that. And then in terms of ward forums, yes, where we're talking about joint forums, joint ward forums, we are talking about effectively 2 or more ward forums coming together and holding a meeting jointly, because there may be something that they, members and councillors wish to discuss that have cross-boundary impacts. And then in terms of 10.8, again, happy to go away and think about that. We'll just liaise with our colleagues over in Scrutiny, who actually are the people who organise ward forums rather than our governance team, and assist with those processes to see if we can't put in some information about how those are advertised.
Just two things there. I would just maybe why don't we just use councillors, and then when we're talking about the mayor, say councillors and the mayor, and then we don't have to use members at all, because we're only talking about the mayor. If we're talking about anyone else other than councillors, it's not the mayor, councillors and another elected body. So I think we can simplify that. I think I was going to say exactly what you said in terms of ward forums. I think we can give example, which may include, I wouldn't want to get into a place that it was descriptive in the constitution, because if you then want to do anything different, you get into that place. We have to update the constitution to reflect it. So I think there's opportunity to give examples of what may happen within a ward forum, but if your officers from the working group take that to those that run the ward forum to give it a bit more detail. But I would advocate and suggest it's in a example format rather than verbatim.
Could I just add to that? I think one solution might be that at least it could say how well in advance it would be advertised, and at least say that it would be, advertised on the website. At least there's one place that people can know that they can look to see if they have a ward forum coming up.
I think things that stay in statute are fine to sit within the constitution. I think different ways of working and different things people might like to do would not really be the right place for that. So anything that it will be advertised on the website, for example, you will know a certain amount of weeks before when your full war room will be run. Those things are fine. Anything that is in statute and stays the same, I think will be fine. But the staff that run the ward forums are best placed to do that. We could do it from my memory. I always think I remember things until I remember them wrongly. So take that back to them, and then we can get the vital information so your right residents know what to expect and where to get the information from, but we're making sure that they understand it's a general guide. Okay. Any more comments or contributions on this item? Councillor Rathbone.
Just to say, I can quite see Councillor Vinnie Lubbock's points about ward forums, but having had a lot of experience of trying to advertise, I do think that our emphasis, you can't start just saying details. I think that's what you're saying as well. It's more about just generally advertising and what you need to negotiate. And we can't say this again, but actually with ward forums these days, with the kind of Tory cuts that we've had to suffer, it's down to councillors really to actually advertise their own ward forums, because they will have some of the better channels rather than the council. But understand his point. And obviously the officers will have to take that away. Regarding ward forums, joint ward forums, we've had sometimes, I think Councillor Gordon and I ran one for 3 wards at once on specific issues. I don't think we can actually constitutionally dictate how it's arranged. I think it's something that can be very free flowing, and you can do it on an issue. You can have, a half a dozen wards if necessary, if that's what you think would work and everybody's in agreement.
The only thing I would say is, again, what we can put on the constitution is what is in statute or guiding principles. The flexibility of ward forums is just exactly that. It's you as local councillors knowing what works best in your ward, listening to your local community groups and thinking about what is the best way to have that dialogue and conversation. And we won't want to legislate too much around that in the constitution around that. So it's just making sure that the basic information that is needed, so people know where to go if they need information, but everything under that, I think needs to be left to the guiding principles of how we run them. Any other comments on this part? Councillor Rathbone, is that deep meditation reflection or?
Yeah, I just, in the ward forums where it's saying ward forums meet up to 3 times a year, I prefer a word that said can meet up, because otherwise that's making a rod for some people's backs, because sometimes you don't need ward forums as such, because you may be using other residential meetings. I mean, I think we, Leabridge, tend to use resident meetings. We have a lot more of those. So I mean, it's for officers to decide, but I just suggest that it's not specified.
I think we can. I think we can make that decision here. I mean, I don't know, Louise, correct me if you think. I don't know if it needs to go back to the working group, unless by not putting up to. Well, no, if it's saying up to 3 times, that means it's giving you a choice to meet up to 3 times, which means you don't have to meet 3 times to achieve your statutory responsibility. So I imagine the changing of the word would be okay, but happy for it to go back to the working group. Councillor Gordon?
I mean, my reading of the current thing is that it's not prescriptive. I mean, ward forums is something which I think is totally within our discretion. So I think the current, I mean, appreciate my colleagues' concerns, but I think the current wording does, doesn't necessarily need to be changed to reflect that. I don't think it's prescriptive. It's just there's discretion there.
Thank you, Councillor Lubbock.
I just wonder if it sets an expectation of up to 3, and in extraordinary circumstances, maybe councillors would decide they would need 4, and would that be not allowed or just not supported by the council? But yeah, I have really no principle anything wrong with the wording as it is at the minute, but just wondering if that can factor in.
I just think it's one for noting, and then the officer working group, I think any point that has had extensive dialogue is also always one to reconsider and reflect on when you're working through the document. Any other comments on this item? No? So I'm going to suggest that we just have a 5-minute comfort break here. I'm just conscious that it's a long meeting, so I wonder if this would be a good break point. Unless people would like to go on a bit longer, I just think maybe just a 5-minute break and come back. Does that seem reasonable to everyone? Okay, thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Louise. So we will now move on to item, so looking at part 3, which is responsibilities for functions. So Louise, if you're ready, I'll hand back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Bramble. This is an existing part of our constitution, rather than a new part that we're proposing be added in. The purpose of this part of the constitution is to provide information on who is responsible for certain functions. Local authority functions are divided into executive functions and non-executive functions. The purpose of this is primarily to explain what that division is, and then who acts on behalf of the executive and on behalf of council, and then also how, in very broad terms, how functions can be delegated then to officers within that. At the moment, the committee only has before it the introductory text. We have been working as an officer working group on the various terms of reference for all of the councils, committees, panels, etc., and to come up with a new template, if you like, for an approach, so that there's consistency in those terms of reference as to how they appear and how people can find information. So, for example, highlighting where we're talking about what the quorum of a committee is, which we hope will improve clarity and presentation. Again, point for the Constitution Committee, you will recall that we are not changing the terms of reference of the various council committees, panels, etc., or reviewing those in any great depth. They were the subject of a review that was undertaken by those respective committees last year, and have already, so that process has already been undertaken. This is more about clarity and presentation. So we hope that at the next meeting, we'll be able to show you what we're proposing that the new presentational style will look like for your comments and input, and then we'll be in a position to move across all of the various terms of reference and information into that new format. Just quickly, other points to note, you will see that we are now proposing that rather than having all of the various functions and whether there's and also things like local choice functions within this part of the constitution as it currently appears, and you end up with large numbers of tables, what we're proposing to do is move those to an appendix to the constitution, so that if we need to make any changes, so for example, if the responsibilities and functions regulations are amended by government, we can do that easily without affecting major pagination within the constitution as a whole, because it will appear right at the very end. So those parts will still be there, but they will just appear as an appendix to the constitution rather than within part 3. But I just wanted members to be aware that we haven't forgotten those. They're not being stripped out. There will still be that information, just somewhere else within the constitution. Thank you.
Thank you. So just for the purpose of the presentation and in the world of acronyms, so the COWG is the Constitution Officer Working Group, just for your reference, colleagues, but many of you maybe have worked that out, as I have referenced that in full throughout the meeting. Thank you for that, Louise. I think that's a helpful distinction where we're talking about the difference between the executive functions and the council functions, and I think that's important that clarity is there. Colleagues, queries, contributions? Councillor Bean Lubbock.
Thank you. Yeah, just a few queries and contributions. Where it's talking about contemplated legal action, I'm just wondering how that is defined, who is contemplating, and is there a risk of that being used as a get out clause for having to address things? On Rule 13 about opposition sponsored business, there's a line about the monitoring officer being able to change a opposition-sponsored business text into a motion. I'm just wondering if they should have to consult with the group who are bringing that, rather than just turning it into a motion immediately, kind of unilaterally. And I have a few other questions. I was wondering why attendance and meeting is counted at 30 minutes. I'm wondering if it should be something more like half the duration of a meeting, or you know, why that particular amount of time has been sort of selected. I think I don't really understand I think the wording around using electronic devices in meetings, number 30, is poorly worded. The fact that it references in particular tweets rather than, it's highlighting one particular social corporation rather than the rest. And there are other reasons why people might use electronic devices, for example, reading speeches, which we know a lot of members do like to do. And I'm wondering if that could be made a little bit less specific and a little bit more general. In public participation, part 6, I'm wondering if there should also be some reference to consultations and ward forums, things like that, that will allow people to know other ways in which they can contribute. And then I have some questions around cabinet. So it says in 5.7 that the leader of any opposition group, chairs and vice chairs of the scrutiny commissions, and the speaker may attend and speak. And I'm just wondering if it would also be possible to include a deputy or someone to deputise for the leader of any opposition group, in the same way as the mayor can have a deputy and vice chairs can come to speak to cabinet, rather than it all being at the feet of the leader of that opposition group. Yeah, and I think other things I can probably raise in writing.
So you mentioned the text was badly worded. That's exactly the, I echo that. That's exactly why I decided to have this forum, and Dawn, in her new role, and Louise were absolutely instrumental in helping me establish this forum. The reason that we are here is that the constitution as it stands is quite laborious, cumbersome, it's challenging to navigate, and as a Labour administration we advocate agency, we advocate participation, we advocate people being able to engage and challenge and question and show their curiosity. But our role as an organisation and the cross-party work we're doing is to ensure that we facilitate people in doing that. And so I appreciate the time that you're all spending on a late evening to ensure that we do this well. So that's exactly the principles of why this was set up. So absolutely echo that. Louise, you wanted to come in. Have you changed your mind? Shall I bring in Councillor Troughton?
No, Deputy Mayor Bramble, I was simply going to ask whether or not you wanted me to deal with these questions now, or actually when we get to part 4, which deals with council procedurals and cabinet procedurals.
I'm
this is part 3 on responsibility for function, so it's actually a different part of the constitution.
Oh, apologies for jumping forward.
Yes, if you take it, then I
think I've got a note of most of them. I think.
Okay, I'll bring in Councillor Troughton, and then you can decide what's ever easier for you to do at this point. If we think it might be more helpful to take it all together in that section, we can wait. Councillor Troughton.
Chair, thank you. I was, really just going to respond to what Councillor Binny Lubbock had said in terms of the 30-minute rule in Rule 23. So I'm happy to wait until later on in the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. So any more contributions or queries on this part? No? Councillor Gordon.
Just a good general comment. I think the section is useful. I mean, the trouble is, I do appreciate we are dealing with. I'm not sure how accessible it is, unfortunately, and I think that's possibly because it's quite sort of complex issues we are dealing with here. And obviously there's sort of, I think it'd be quite helpful to actually include the sort of list of executive and non-executive functions. I do appreciate the regulations might be changed and updated, but I think that would be something that would be helpful as well. I mean, I don't know whether we can slightly more explain how executive and non-executive functions work, because I don't think it's immediately accessible to the public. Is there anything more that we can do about that? I don't know whether other people agree with me about that. It's, I think this is something that maybe just needs to be tested a little bit more about how much people understand it. It's quite important. So,
I think so, and it goes back to the information that we're given in the glossary and not making assumptions that a word that we are comfortable and always using, that people know what that is. So I think we could just test that a bit more. Anything more on this section? No? Okay, let's move on to part 4. If I can ask you to come and introduce that. Thank you, Louise.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Bramble. So the first part of part 4, gosh, that we're going to be looking at is around the council procedure rules, and we'll come on to cabinet procedure rules in a moment. Obviously, the purpose of those is to detail the rules which govern our council meetings, and they apply to our meetings of the full council, and also we have them at the end. We use them for our committees and panels, etc., of those that are established by full council with appropriate amendment. Most of these have not been subject to change from as currently exists. We may be changing wording, hopefully, to improve upon explanation and for the principles of plain English, but we have highlighted for you where we are intending to make some changes, and you'll see those on the slides, and also you have those in your committee report. But in brief, in terms of rules 9 and 10, which deal with our questions by members of the public and members of and councillor questions, we are proposing that harmonisation between questions, deputations and petitions to make sure that where we accept or don't accept a question, that there is consistency of approach. Taking the point that Councillor Binny Lubbock had made about contemplated legal proceedings, what we mean by contemplated legal proceedings are those where, for example, in judicial review cases, we may have received a pre-action protocol letter, which is formally something that's required before proceedings are issued by court or at court, to effectively say to the council that we are minded to take legal action against you to challenge one of your decisions. And also, or alternatively, where we have had correspondence from people to indicate that they wish to take legal proceedings against the council, or conversely, where we have intimated to a party that we, as an authority, may wish to take legal proceedings against them, whether they be civil or criminal. Once matters get to that stage, it's our view that they really are not something that's appropriate for discussion, because we as an authority will be constrained by what we can say, and therefore the response that we are able to give may not be as full as otherwise were the case. Now, that's not to say that once those proceedings have concluded that there then can't be questions which can be answered, but just at those two particular stages, you know, it becomes quite difficult about what we can and cannot say, hence why that particular one about contemplated legal proceedings is in there. There's also a change proposed again for deputations, which is Rule 11. Again, that's to bring it into line with around questions.
Louise, can I just want to come in on Rule 9 and 10. I just think that's quite helpful, only because we're doing this process to ensure that we have more transparency. And I think that sometimes, for different reasons, when when a resident comes, or when a person comes to present a question, sometimes it's at a point of frustration. They might have not got the response they want, an email might have got lost, you know, they feel passionately about something. And sometimes it's unhelpful if an officer then has to say, because of leading proceedings, we can't respond, because it may seem as a way of us not being transparent, and them thinking that actually we don't want to be transparent. So I think that strengthens our argument in trying to make everything flow in terms of transparency. So I think that's a good thing to bring in there. Members may feel differently, but I'll let you continue, Louise. But I thought that it was important that actually by putting that in there, it helps us strengthen what we're saying, that we want to be open and transparent and give the most detailed answers that we can anytime that we're questioned in these chambers. Thank you, Louise.
Thank you. So, as I mentioned, Rule 11 with deputations, the substantive amendments are to bring those in line with questions in terms of when we can and cannot accept a deputation at that specific moment that somebody is asking us that question. Rule 13 on opposition sponsored business. This rule is predominantly, as exists in our current constitution, the bit that officers are proposing to change is currently the constitution talks about such business being conducted at meetings which have been identified for that business. And in reality, there is no such formal identification. So what officers are proposing is an amendment so that formal opposition sponsored business, which is something different to questions and putting motions, can be placed on an agenda at effectively all meetings of the council, other than the meetings where we are setting the budget. So that's our February-March meeting, and also at the annual meeting. The annual meeting, because obviously that's our meeting, our sort of constitutional arrangements meeting, appointment of a new speaker, and it's more ceremonial. And the budget setting meeting, because obviously the budget will take up a significant portion of the timing of that meeting, and clearly the opposition has an opportunity to present their own alternative budgets under the budget and policy framework in any event. So that is one of the substantive changes there. And then the other change that we have put forward is in relation to timing for opposition sponsored debates. Currently, the Constitution indicates that those types of debates are to continue until the Speaker considers that there's been sufficient time. And that obviously is not ideal in terms of being clear as to how long those types of debates are to be to take within our agenda. So we are proposing that we actually introduce a specific time limit for them, in much the same way as we have time limits for council questions and members' public questions, so that everyone is clear how long there is to debate a piece of opposition-sponsored business. I don't know if that does deal with all of the points Councillor Billy Lubbock raised in initially, but I'm sure he will tell me if I've forgotten anything.
Thank you, Louise. Did you want to come? Did you have a follow-up point on that point, Councillor?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, come back in and then I'll take Councillor Child.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Bramble. Yeah, I guess the other points that I raised were in response to what you were saying. As the only member of opposition party here, I would, be remiss not to say, is 10 minutes enough? Is 15 minutes better? And does it need to specify how long for each speaker, like we have in other debates? And it doesn't say how long an intro would be, that kind of thing. And my question was originally, if opposition sponsored business is submitted and the monitoring officer believes it would be better treated as a motion, can they do that unilaterally, or do they have to, or can it be included that we say that they have to do that in conjunction or in conversation with the proposer or of the opposition sponsored business?
Louise, do you want to, I'm going to take in Councillor Poughton and you can decide whether you want to respond to that now or come back to the reference group. I would want officers to be able to make adjustments if it wasn't appropriate. If there was anything inappropriate that isn't in line with the Constitution or had an issue around legality, I would want officers to have the freedom to be able to do that without having to speak to anyone. And I imagine that is what the Constitution is talking about rather than anything different, but I'm happy to be corrected on that. This isn't about, because this isn't written to take away the power, the voice of elected councillors or even the public. This is around the functionality of the council to ensure anything that's brought before us is the right thing that goes through the right legislative framework. But I'm happy to be corrected. I'm going to pause you there, Councillor, and bring in Councillor Troughton, and then I think Dawn wants to come in, and then I'm going to go back to Louise. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. The point I wanted to make is around the public and member questions. I just think that because there's quite a lot of information about timing there, that it might be good to insert the maximum time for each question, which would be, I think, 8 minutes by my calculation, just so that it's really clear. I think I noted an error in paragraph 10.12. I have sent, obviously, Louise, you're aware, I've sent in quite a lot of comments, and most of these are simply style, and now you've explained that you haven't actually been through this for style. I can sort of understand now why some of these have come up, but just to improve the accessibility of the language, that was really. So I'll just leave those for you to consider outside the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Troughton. Dawn?
Thank you, Chair. I think I understand where Councillor Binny Lubbock is coming from. And so it's important that we, however, acknowledge that the monitoring officer's hands, the Constitution is not there to tie the monitoring officer's hands or officer's hands in those situations. So again, I think it's about the wording and explaining the wording so that, because we in Hackney, we do work in a collaborative way, and I would hope that would continue. So it's really, do we need to create an opportunity somewhere within the Constitution that reflects that, maybe? Because that's very important for myself as monitoring officer anyway, and I think, and Louise as well as deputy monitoring officer, but I think also other monitoring officers who may come should want to work in that collaborative way. So it's how we can reflect it maybe in the glossary as to those good principles of working, but we don't want to be in a position where the Constitution is then used as something which could tie the hands of the monitoring officer.
That's it, because I think the principles are there of good governance and good ways of working. I think, if there was a time when you needed to change something swiftly and people couldn't get back to you, for example, when you missed the deadline to submit a motion, I think those things are just the principle of officers being able to do their work, their everyday job needs to be, they need the opportunity to be able to do that. But again, it's one of those points that we'll reflect on and they'll reconsider and address in the working group. I'm going to move on from that point. Has anyone got any other contributions? I think one of the examples I would give is the existing rule of 29, which talks about smoking in meetings. I think things like that, officers, I'm confident, should go away and remove from the Constitution, because obviously that's no longer needed to sit in there because the law has changed. So automatically we understand in public buildings, inside buildings, you can no longer smoke, and confident for officers to do those works as and when new legislation is given. And I think that that's the kind of empowerment that I suppose I'm referring to, rather than giving officers the opportunity to shape and change policies or potential policies or standpoints of the council. Councillor Troughton and then Councillor Gordon.
Thank you, Chair. It's just coming back to Councillor Binny Lubbock's point about the minimum attendance at meetings. And I would propose deleting 15 and just, 30 minutes minimum attendance is what's required regardless of the length of the meeting. You could have a meeting that lasts 3 hours. 30 minutes would still apply. You could have a meeting that lasted 45 minutes. What is the difference basically if a meeting lasts 30 minutes or 45 minutes? If it lasts 45 minutes, is the requirement then 22.5? I think 30 is clear and understandable, and anyone who can't basically turn up for 30 minutes, well, they haven't really been at the meeting. So I just think make it simple.
Any other points? Oh, Councillor Gordon, I did say.
Yeah. Apologies, Chair. I think it's probably outside the remit of this meeting, but I think maybe just a reflection really on how our procedural rules sort of enable engagement with the public. And I think we've got commitment really as a administration to do further work on sort of public engagement, and I think part of that should be, I think, really sort of analysing which members of the public engage with these processes and how accessible they find them. I think it's I think it would be maybe just quite good to really just sort of do a backward reflection on who's been engaging with these processes and what the outcomes have been.
As you mentioned the word engagement, I'm just going to pause here. Sudan, this might be a good idea if you wanted to make a comment, and then you're obviously welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting, but equally if you wanted to leave and make your way home or to study, this would be a good point for you to do that as well, so you choose. So yeah, if you just wanted to contribute at this time.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Bramble. So the question that was proposed to us was, how can we engage young people within the council? How can we get more young voices within the council? And I sort of just have 3 things to say. So my first thing would be that, firstly, I want to thank the council for giving us a platform within one of the scrutiny commissions, the Children and Young People Scrutiny Commission. I've been an avid member of it, and it has definitely increased young voices within the council. However, I would like to say that alongside myself, but everyone else in Hackney Parliaments, we feel like we need to have a seat at other scrutiny committees also, such as the Living in Hackney Scrutiny Commission, just because Children and Young People Scrutiny Commission is great, and a lot of the things that are dealt with in that Scrutiny Commission is something that we are involved in as representatives of young people. But living in Hackney, we are also residents of Hackney, and sometimes in Children and Young People Scrutiny Commission, we can't go into details about housing or the environment or sustainability and things like that. And I've seen that in that scrutiny, the Living in Hackney one, they can, and it is the main area. So I think it would be great to have young people speaking there, representing young people there, because we have a huge population of residents who are under 18 who would love to speak on that. My second thing comes from one of our members in Hackney Youth Parliament, and he says that we should maybe have more, the council should maybe have more school visits to explain how important democracy is, how important the council's job is, what the council does. As a student who was in studying in Hackney just basically 6 months ago, I didn't actually know what the council exactly does until I stepped into being a member of youth parliament. So it could be a great thing for councillors to go into schools, maybe like once a year even, to explain what the council does, how they could be involved. I just think it's great. And thirdly, I want to have a special shout out to other organisations such as Hackney Young Futures. they are amazing. They also increase young voices within the council. So alongside us, maybe the council should, continue working with them and us and other organizations like them and Rise 365 and, all these communities would be great. Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you firstly for your contribution and being here this evening. Being a former scrutiny chair, I would absolutely continue to advocate the work of scrutiny and say the valuable work that they do. I would actually argue that the more the council has to make difficult decisions, the more important scrutiny becomes to us as an organisation. So I think that's key. You mentioned the opportunity for us to go into schools. We do have Democracy Week, and we have that once a year. And I'm happy to work with you and colleagues to think about how we can strengthen that offer and what we can do. Maybe you and I could do some videos that they can play in schools in assembly. I know that you were part of the young working group that have done some resources in school. We talked a lot about national government, and I thought that actually let's develop what we do here locally in terms of localism and power. Labour is in power here, even if we're not nationally, and there's some really great things that we've done as a result of being in power. So let's talk to young people about that some more. I'm happy to write to the scrutiny chairs after a little consultation with Councillor Gordon as the role that she plays in overview and scrutiny. Happy to write to chairs to ask them to consider this role and maybe just working with you in terms of what you've needed to be put in place for you to do the role on children and young people scrutiny, to ensure that's in place for the other scrutinies. And I think that's a reasonable request, simply because all of what is important to you doesn't sit in children and young people, and you've all got a range of talent across the board. So thank you for those contributions. So thank you. Dawn, did you want to come in? Yes, Dawn.
Yeah. Thank you, Deputy Mayor Bramble. So I would just like to say thank you to the Youth Parliament for attending today. I think it's really important as part of this work that we do have that wider engagement, and it's something that I know both yourself, Chair, and also Vice Chair, Councillor Gordon, are very, have expressed an interest in us doing so. And we would like to continue to work closely with representatives from the Youth Parliament, in the progression of the work around the Constitution. So it might be that we would ask them to have a look at a particular section and to see how they view it. Is it accessible to them as young people? What are their thoughts on it? It's just part of that wider engagement which we're committed to doing as part of this work. Thank you.
And thank you, and I want to commend the work you've been doing on this Constitution around engagement and young people. Dawn, I know you were very keen for young people to be part of this work and worked really closely to ensure Youth Parliament had a place here. As I said, you're welcome to stay or leave at this point in the meeting, but thank you for your contributions. They were helpful. Councillor Gordon.
Yeah, I'd just also like to thank students and our colleagues for their contribution. Also, you are very welcome to attend on the 20th of February at the scrutiny panel meeting. So, yeah.
Thank you for that, Councillor Gordon, for doing that. And I just think I'd just like to just formalise that, if that's an action point for us to take away. I think just to formally write to scrutiny chairs for them to respond and give a bit of guidance of what's happened in other meetings and what might need to be in place. And then I'm happy then to write back to Youth Parliament and you as the speaker, giving dates and information, and we can arrange an induction for everyone, a general induction on scrutiny rather than specific around children and young people scrutiny. And I'll ask Councillor, I've just volunteered Councillor Gordon to join me in doing that in her role, but equally any members on this committee may want to engage on that. Okay, any comments or contributions on this item? No? Councillor Lubbock.
Yeah, now that we are on part 4, I'll just throw in a few other things. So, yeah, I was wondering if there's any on 16.4, if there's any view to putting more flexibility around the time allotted for motions, as we've been having quite a lot of motions and trying to get through a fair few. I'm just wondering if there's any, because it feels like it's been a bit constricted by that 30-minute time limit, even though we were able to pass 3 at the last meeting, which was great. 25.1, it says councillors must remain seated while a councillor is speaking unless they wish to make a point of order or a point of personal explanation. I'm wondering if that might be a bit restrictive. I know I've seen councillors go to the toilet and things like that, and I'm wondering if that is, you know, is a breach of conduct. As I mentioned, I think the 29.2 about electronic communication devices is again too restrictive and limited. And then finally around cabinet, I'm wondering if we could allow for deputies of the leaders of the opposition groups to speak and ask questions of cabinet in their place. And one last thing about public participation. At 1.4 about licensing subcommittees which are held remotely. I'm just wondering if there's an issue around there around digital inclusion, and if there's anything that we can do to try and mitigate for that. And at 1.9 it says libelous, offensive and discriminatory comments will be disregarded and not minuted. I suppose that is, it's especially libelous. Is that a legal term, in which case does that need to be potentially libelous rather than something that's being legally determined as libel?
Thank you. So in terms of a comfort break, I don't think having a comfort break would violate the terms of the Constitution, but officers come in and correct me if I'm different. So that's absolutely clear. No one is to sit there bursting or cause themselves any discomfort or anyone next to them any discomfort. You must use the toilet facilities if you need, and I don't think that violates the constitution in any point, but you officers can correct me on that. There was quite a few things there, Louise. I suggest you respond to what you can now. Anything that will be for wider debate, take it back to the working group, but you might just want to indicate which is which, but I'll leave that for your wisdom. I'm going to take Councillor Troughton and then come back to you, Louise. Councillor Troughton, have you changed your mind?
No, thank you, Chair. Just to point out that existing Rule 30 sort of morphs into 31. So I just want to make sure that doesn't slip through the net.
Thank you. Louise?
If I take that in reverse order, Councillor Troughton, yes, thank you, and also for pointing that out in your email to us earlier. We have spotted that. We'll make sure it should all just, the numbering went awry when we were renumbering or having deleted something. So we'll make sure that gets taken forward. Then very briefly, in terms of, it comes under Rule 20, the point that Councillor Binny Lubbock was making around motions, that comes actually under Rule 27. And that's something specific. So under Rule 27, we are now proposing that there will be an amendment of that so that council procedurals can be suspended to enable the debate for motions to take longer than the 30 minutes. That will always be subject to the 10:30 cut-off, as no meeting of the council can go beyond 10:30. But that is what we are proposing by way of amendment at Rule 27, so that motions are included within the list of those rules that can be subject to suspension or amendment without there having been formal notice in advance of the meeting. We thought that was a more appropriate way of dealing with that. And again, just for members to note that in light of our proposed amendment to a timeline for this constitution, we'll actually also be taking that forward at the annual meeting as an amendment to the constitution, so that we can get that in play sooner than waiting for this constitution to be updated and finally approved. You're absolutely right, Deputy Mayor Bramble. There's nothing to prevent members, if they need to take a toilet break, getting up and going for a toilet break. That's not the purpose of the seating rules at all. That's just to remind members that it's not a sort of about getting up and down, putting microphones on while other people are speaking. It's to remain seated in your chair to give respect to the person who is actually speaking in that moment and is stood to do so. And then quickly, we will take all the other points away and certainly look at the wording of Rule 32 and the use, Rule 30, sorry, around the use of electronic communications device, taking the point that members do use their tablets and or mobile devices for having their speeches on to refer to. So we will reflect on that. And then just very quickly about the record of attendance and the time limit. The 30 minutes was obviously an officer view about what we thought should be the minimum length of time. And then the purpose of having a lower level is that we have had meetings that haven't lasted 30 minutes. And therefore, if you have a 30-minute rule, then technically nobody has attended that meeting for the purposes of the Local Government Act. And then obviously that could put people in difficulties, hence why we are suggesting that for those meetings that last for 30 minutes or less, it's a 15-minute attendance requirement. That's an arbitrary number that we've come up with for those meetings. It doesn't happen very often, but it has happened in the past. So if your meeting is 25 minutes and you have a requirement to attend for 30 in order for your attendance to count, what then happens with that attendance? But hopefully you take the point we're trying to make. Whether or not we've successfully achieved it is something that we can go away and think about.
I think on two things, I do remember vaguely where there has been some meetings where they have lasted about 20 minutes, so that 30 minutes then invalidates that meeting. But it's very rare now with the level of business that we discussed. But again, it's about putting the principles in place that we don't have to come back and revisit the Constitution when we know that these non-levies can exist. And in terms of the motion, maybe it would have been helpful for me to say that I know this arises in the meeting itself, and I had a lengthy conversation with the mayor, who is keen to look at this as well, and Dawn and I and Louise had a good discussion on this. I think we can't change. I wouldn't recommend we say how long we can discuss motions for, because we do have the arbitrary cutoff of 10:30. So we need to leave the flexibility within the chair's discretion to ensure that they can extend motions, for example, but ensure that, as Louise rightly said, it sits within the framework of the meeting. And I think that that's covered. So I just thought it was important for me to remind everyone that it's something that we took seriously, and the mayor and I and officers have discussed in grave detail to avoid the situation that we had, that a motion had to then be revisited a month after, which no one wants. Lynn?
Thanks, Chair. Just to come back on the 30-minute, 15-minute thing. I mean, I recently attended a meeting that literally lasted 5 minutes. So you'd still be left with the same problem. But I take your point, Louise, and I'll think around that and send you an email tomorrow with some suggested alternative.
Thank you, Councillor Chowton, much appreciated.
Thank you. Right, I can't see any more indications, so if we can move on to the next part, please, Louise. Thank you. So, count.
Yes, so just, I know we've briefly also touched upon some of the cabinet procedurals, and we'll reflect upon the point that Councillor Binny Lubbert made about effectively deputies for group leaders to be able to attend meetings if the group leader is unavoidably detained elsewhere. So the cabinet procedurals, they are the rules that govern our cabinet meetings. What we have attempted to do with the amendments is to align them with the council procedure rules, and adopt approach of instead of just repetition for the sake of repetition in another section, cross-refer them. So where there are council procedure rules that are relevant, there's a cross-reference then to the council rules with appropriate amendments to reflect the fact that this is cabinet and it's not the speaker. There'll be a chair of that meeting, whether that's the mayor or the deputy mayor in the mayor's absence. So that is the approach that we've taken. And just for members to note, the mayor has recently also suggested to us that we include rules for the various executive committees. The council procedure rules at the end, there's a reference to committees of council. They adopt those rules with amendments as required, but just to make that sort of more explicit for the purposes of executive committees such as the Cabinet Procurement and Insourcing. Yes, I have got that the right way down. Cabinet Procurement and Insourcing Committee, because at the moment within our constitution there isn't those types of cross-referencing. So we have noted that, and we'll take that on board and move that forward. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Gordon.
Very briefly, Chair, I think, yeah, I mean, thanks for that, Louise. I may send you some further comments in writing on some of these sections. But just, I do fully support really, you know, in the interest of sort of transparency, rules being included for cabinet committees. I just, are there any others that may be caught by this? I wasn't sure. I think it's obviously quite important. These are, you know, quite important decision-making bodies. It's really important, I think, that we do proceed with including them in the constitution.
Louise, back to you. Thank you.
I'm probably going to now be shot down in flames after this meeting, but at the current moment, I can't think of another committee other than CPIC, Cabinet Procurement and Insourcing Committee, that is an executive committee. But we will do that double check process, because I'm sure as soon as I sign off, if there's one, I'll think of it. To ensure that all executive committees are encompassed within that. Also noting that it is for the mayor each year to determine the number and type of executive committees that he wants to operate through his, effectively through his scheme of delegation. So that may change from time to time in any event. In terms of what we have today may not be the case in a year's time or 2 years' time.
So that process will, you know, obviously need to be set out, you know, reviewed and set out as transparently as possible. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Councillor Binny Ladbrokes.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I was just wondering about, you were saying we're referring to other areas to reduce the length and to keep this, you know, do well with brevity. I'm just wondering if that reduces clarity in some instances, like if people are just looking to see how to do a deputation to cabinet. And I guess that will be resolved if the IT issues are well resolved and things can be hyperlinked well and properly, so that people can easily find the rules to which there are references while they're reading it.
So Louise might come back in at that. So yes, part of the earlier work that we did in the first stage was talking about the importance of hyperlinks and accessibility, and a lot of the way that we've reworded and repositioned the constitution is to make it make more sense, because prior to us doing this work, you could get a lot of information about one subject, but you had to go in lots of different places and it didn't all tally together. So yes, having those hyperlinks has been part of the work that we said should happen. So I hope that gives you good reassurance that, you know, what you're thinking of is actually in train and will be happening.
And just to add to that quickly, Deputy Mayor Bramble, the governance team has also been working on the information that's available on the council's website that draws out the various rules around deputations, petitions and questions, to hopefully make that more accessible. That went live as part of, or just in advance of Local Democracy Week last week. So we will be keeping an eye on how well that is obviously received by members of the public who want to use it, and you know, what questions are we still getting around how do I submit a deputation for cabinet, to see if the approach that we've taken is appropriate in terms of accessibility for the public. And then I think finally, again, just a point of note is that some of this work around deputations in particular is then drawn together in the new part 6 that we're just about to come to. Because there's a specific section around deputations where we're sort of taking the various elements of the rules and trying to draw it in one place to avoid people having to do lots of cross-referencing across all the other parts and sections of the constitution. Again, it remains to be seen how successful we've already been at doing that with our wording and drafting and content, and how successful that will be when we go to engagement.
Thank you. Let's move on to, as it's now been mentioned, to part 6. So might be helpful to say that attendance at meetings, petition scheme, these are, sorry, public speaking and attendance at meetings are new parts that we're considering to add. the deputations is new but draws on existing information around cabinet and procedure rules. So I think that's important to highlight. Louise, can I hand over to you?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Bramble. So as you've indicated, this part 6 we're proposing is actually an entirely new part for our constitution, although we are moving some existing sections from other places to hopefully provide the public with one place where they can go and get the vast majority of the information they need to assist them in participating in our decision making. So it's sort of a collation. Now, in having sort of come up with that approach, we do appreciate that by necessity lengthens the constitution, but for the purposes of providing that clarity and information, we actually think that's a worthwhile thing to do. So as you say, we've got some entirely new sections around attendance at meeting, public speaking. The rules about public speaking at committee meetings and licensing, they've been around for a long time, but again, it's drawing them into that one place, as opposed to having to ask, the governance officer who is responsible for planning committee, I want to speak, how do I go about speaking? Access to information, that's existing. Our petition scheme is existing, and I'll draw your attention to one change that we're proposing. And then our protocol for recording and live streaming meetings. Again, that's new. And the aim of that is to provide information about how do we live stream, how do we record, how long do we keep our recordings for, so that if the public either want to view live as it's happening or go back after the event, they know how long that those recordings will be maintained. And then just quickly, the amendment for the petition scheme is that with respect to petitions that concern executive functions, where we receive petitions with over 700 signatures, what we are proposing is that instead of those coming to council, only to be referred to cabinet, because they are a matter for cabinet to consider and decide whether or not to accept, because they reference an executive functions. And the recent petition around motorcycle parking is a good example of that. For efficiency and to ensure that petitions are considered at the earliest opportunity, what we are proposing is an amendment so that it is made clear that those types of petitions will go straight to cabinet, won't have to come to council and then be referred to cabinet. It's sort of that efficiency of process to ensure that we can deal with them as quickly as possible, because to take the motorcycle petitions, unfortunately there was a slight delay because of the need to change the meeting in September, but that petition was received, so it waited until November, then it goes back to cabinet. Had it gone straight to cabinet, cabinet could have considered that much sooner. So that's why we are proposing that amendment, but obviously that will affect those matters which actually concern executive functions. So with that introduction,
I'm just going to say though, although as you mentioned, it's rightly processed, but the important thing is it's actually a good way to ensure when residents, when people raise something with us, that it goes to the right part of the council at the right time and ensures the quickest response from us. Because if something goes to council, it could be a matter of time, given that we don't have full council every month. It's also about access. Remember, we have cabinet every month. We don't have council every month. So again, it's all about how we empower and strengthen what residents want to bring before us. Thank you, Louise. Any comments on that, Louise, before I open it up?
No, thank you, Deputy Mayor Bramble, you have it.
Councillor Troughton and Councillor Gordon, I can't see any other indications.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, just on a general point, I noticed that the section in parts, if not in the main, but I think in parts, started using the first person, and I don't think that's appropriate for a document like this. It's inconsistent as well with the rest of the document, so I'd like a bit of clarification around that. And then the rest of it, I thought was good. I had some comments which you're aware of already, Louise. But the one that I wanted to raise here was whether it was correct that agendas are available in the town hall, because I haven't seen them. And I do remember a time when they used to be, you know, readily available. Like you could just walk into the town hall and that week's agendas were laid, you know, were in a position where the public could go and look at them. I've not seen that for quite some time. So if that's not the case, but the point is, do we think that is necessary? You know, in terms of accessibility, is that something we should be providing? Is it consistent with our, you know, climate change objective? Or should it just be available on request, you know? So I would like some clarification from members on that.
My understanding it is available on request, and when we say request, I suppose it's clarifying if you need to give prior warning to receive it on request, or if you can come in and request it, and if a hard copy is not available, it can be given to you. But my understanding is that that was still an option. But thank you for your comments, Councillor Troughton. I'm going to bring in Councillor Gordon, then Councillor Vinnie Lubbock, and then back to Louise, and then moving on to the next item.
Yeah, I mean, I think just in general, really, I'd like to sort of congratulate Louise and your team really on this section, which I think is a really, you know, really helpful development for the Constitution. I think it's really sort of serving its purpose. I think having you know, the information together, and I really like quite a few of the drafting you know, decisions that have been made, you know, for example, setting out the monitoring office, and I'd suggest this for the other offices really in relation to sort of what's the statutory framework, what's Hackney sort of practice. I mean, I think maybe we could have a little bit more discussion about the sort of practicalities of the remote attendance protocol. I think there could be a role for a little bit more discussion from the chair. And I think that will be something that members will have, you know, sort of an interest in. I think there are, you know, some equalities issues here really in relation to, you know, members being able to attend. I mean, possibly members, if they're ill, for example, you know, might not want to show their faces in meetings. I think maybe there is a little bit more room for discretion there. I think, you know, that's something I think we maybe need to discuss a bit more. But other than that, I think I'll supply some further comments in writing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Am I, just to seek clarity, you're saying when councillors are online, giving them the opportunity to not be visible on camera?
Well, I mean, I support that in, you know, in principle, that if you are at a council meeting, you should be, you know, visible, you know, as a sort of starting point. You should be visible and attending, and not, you know, not doing anything else. But I mean, I think there may be some issues where, you know, some circumstances where the chair should have a discretion in relation to that.
Yes, I mean, I think, because I think when you're working from home, it takes you into a different paradigm and context than you are in a room. But I think in principle, where it's possible, it's helpful to have people on screen. But we have to understand, if you're working from home, and depending on your arrangements at home or who's in your home for different reasons, at times you may need to switch off your camera. So that flexibility is helpful to be written into the Constitution. Councillor Vinnie Lubbock.
Yeah, I'd like to echo Councillor Gordon on commending this section. I'd be really interested to see, you know, once it's agreed and codified into the Constitution, other ways that we can communicate it as well, whether that could be like a video explainer of some of the ways that people can get involved, something like that. And I was also wondering whether in the sort of first page of it, whether it would be possible to have hyperlinks to sections on questions to full council, on what other areas of participation, so for example ward forums, consultations, that kind of thing as well.
So yeah, the principles of hyperlinks is to go throughout the whole document to allow access. I don't think it's going to be limited to any area. That was the decision that we made, that all through the Constitution those links will be made, so that really no matter where you access it, that you'll get all the relevant information that you need at that given point when you access the document. So that is the principle in theory. I think once it's established and we ask people to test run it, hopefully they'll inform us into how accessible what we think we've done is accessible. Because I think what we're doing is great, but I need the ratification of the public to echo that, to say actually the work that you're doing, all of us are doing, is equally deemed as good as well. Louisa, do you want to come back at that?
Just in response to Catherine Charlton, yes, there should be consistency of language all the way through. So if we have used things like we and I, they should be changed to effectively third person. Because to ensure that there is consistency across the whole of the Constitution. So we will ensure that process is undertaken again with that particular part. Agendas in the town hall, I will need to take that one away and look at it again, just because off the top of my head, I cannot remember actually what the legislative provisions are around having agendas available. I know there are specific rules about agendas being available for people to see, but I just need to again cross-check those references to make sure that part is correct going forward. And then I know there were some comments around our remote attendance protocol, which is even to new part 9. I'm happy to take those comments away for the officer working group to ensure that we have there is at least some reflection of discretion by the chair.
Thank you, because I know indeed for this full council, hard copies were given to some members within the meeting, but the public, I'm not sure. Now, I think we had a discussion on whether we were going to have a system that people that were comfortable were maybe using devices to access the agenda items, if we were going to have mobile laptops as well, not laptops, iPads. I think we did discuss that. So maybe we need to put that back in the round, but we have to accept some people just like the feel of paper.
Yeah.
I was going to say, like some people like to listen to music on vinyl, but I thought, my gosh, I've just aged myself rapidly in this meeting. Some people feel more comfortable or confident with paper rather than access on a device. So we'll wait. Councillor Troughton, is it urgent? I'm just conscious we've got quite a few items left, and I'm keen, although I'm happy to keep the meeting going on. I think given that I would have had you here for 2.5 hours, I'd want to try and finish on time where possible.
Chair, it was just, I didn't realise we were going to do the remote attendance bit, and I do have quite a major issue as regards remote attendance for exempt items. And I do think that members should, to all intents and purposes, members of a committee attending remotely, although by virtue of the discretion of the chair we have speaking rights, we are to all intents and purposes members of the public. And I do think members attending remotely should be required to leave the meeting for the consideration of exempt items, simply because you just don't know. There's no check there, and can the public have confidence that confidentiality was not breached if a member is attending remotely? I mean, if a member can't vote on an item and isn't counted towards a quorum, I think the way round is they will have received the agenda, and if they have any questions and they're not able to attend in person, they can direct those questions through the chair. I do think for the security of the council that even if you're a member of the committee for exempt items, you should leave the meeting. Thank you.
That back to the working group just in the interest of time, but thank you, point well made and noted. So can we move on to the next part of the Constitution, please, Louise?
Chair, we have already briefly touched on these two next parts in any event, so you may feel that we have done sufficient. Part 8 is a new part, or there's a new protocol to go into Part 8, which deals with officers, which is effectively a monitoring officer protocol. It's a protocol that many local authorities have within their constitution. It just sets out the working arrangements and the relationships that the monitoring officer or MO needs to ensure that they are able to effectively discharge their statutory obligations. We have predominantly, I'm not giving the game away, we have used what other local authorities have for our monitoring officer protocol. So there's nothing new in there in terms of we're taking a different approach to other authorities, but we felt it was important to have that. And then as we have moved on to it, the remote attendance, again, new part, we've already had some discussion around that, and we'll take away and reflect those discussion points at the officer group and come back to you with regards to the drafting of the protocol. Thank you, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Louise. Councillor Troughton?
I just suggest that in paragraph 2.2 in particular, that it should be that it should say that any advice given by the monitoring officer should be recorded in the minutes.
Thank you for your forensic eye, Councillor Troughton. That is noted, and I can see Louise
Sorry
as we
about that.
speak making a note of that. So that's really helpful. Well, colleagues, if almost by magic, or I'd like to think that I'm a reasonably well chaired the meeting, that we are now back on time. I would like to thank colleagues for their continued input. I think this is fascinating, and I think this is really exciting work. The work that we do may not seem exciting and it may not seem that interesting, but the work that you are sitting here and deciding to take part of means that our members will have, our residents have better access to the council and us, who are the decision makers and their representatives, and I think that's brilliant. So I really do appreciate all the input. I want to thank the Constitution Officer Working Group that continues to do the day-to-day every difficult point, and thank you, colleagues, for responding to the new ways of working in the meeting. I think general dialogue opposed to the page turn, I think, in my view, has worked better, but do get back to me on email if you strongly disagree. But if you do, happy for you to nod virtually and in the room. And thank you for colleagues that when reading the documents and papers that were sent out, took advantage of the new ways of working. So that was Councillor Trout, Councillor Gordon and Councillor Binny Lugbeck, who sent comments in advance of the meeting in that new ways of working. So I do not have any urgent, I don't have any OBs or any urgent matters arising. So on that note, I'm going to thank everybody attending in the room and virtually. Thank you for your attendance this evening. Good night.